actor and writer and keeps going, yeah, all those wonderful things. But at any rate, Jim is reading today from 100 Years of Solitude, and this book has been challenged and banned because it is garbage, being passed off as literature, and because of profane language, of course.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind if I sit. Because I've been practicing, well, they can't see me sitting down there. I've been practicing sitting.
Okay.
Now am I on?
On? Yes.
Am I on? Yeah. Oh boy, I sure am. Jose Arcadio Buendia did not succeed in deciphering the dream of houses with mirror walls until the day he discovered ice. Then he thought he understood its deep meaning. He thought that in the near future, they would be able to manufacture blocks of ice on a large scale from such a common material as water, and with them build the new houses of the village. The condo would no longer be a burning place where the hinges and door knockers twisted with the heat, but would be changed into a wintry city. If he did not persevere in his attempts to build an ice factory, it was because at that time he was absolutely enthusiastic over the education of his sons, especially that of Aureliano, who from the first had revealed a strange intuition for alchemy. The laboratory had been dusted off, reviewing Malachades' notes, serene now, without the exultation of novelty. In prolonged and patient sessions, they tried to separate Ursula's gold from the debris that was stuck to the bottom of the pot. Young Jose Arcadio scarcely took part in the process. While his father was involved body and soul with his water pipe, the willful firstborn, who had always been too big for his age, had become a monumental adolescent. His voice had changed. An incipient fuzz appeared on his upper lip. One night, as Ursula went into the room where he was undressing to go to bed, she felt a mingled sense of shame and pity. He was the first man that she had seen naked after her husband, and he was so well equipped for life that he seemed abnormal. Ursula, pregnant for the third time, relived her newlywed terror. Around that time, a merry, foul-mouthed, provocative woman came to the house to help with the chores, and she knew how to read the future in cards. Ursula spoke to her about her son. She thought that his disproportionate size was something as unnatural as her cousin's tail of a pig. The woman let out an expansive laugh that resounded through the house like a spray of broken glass. "Just the opposite," she said. "He'll be very lucky." In order to confirm her prediction, she brought her cards to the house a few days later and locked herself up with Jose Arcadio in a granary off the kitchen. She calmly placed her cards on an old carpenter's bench, saying anything that came into her head, while the boy waited beside her, more bored than intrigued. Suddenly, she reached out her hand and touched him. "Lordy," she said, sincerely startled, and that was all she could say. Jose Arcadio felt his bones filling up with foam, a languid fear, and a terrible desire to weep. The woman made no insinuations, but Jose Arcadio kept looking for her all night long, for the smell of smoke that she had under her armpits and that had got caught under his skin. He wanted to be with her all the time. He wanted her to be his mother, for them never to leave the granary, and for her to say, "Lordy," to him. One day he could not stand it anymore, and he went looking for her at her house. He made a formal visit, sitting uncomfortably, uncomprehendingly in the living room without saying a word. At that moment he had no desire for her. He found her different, entirely foreign to the image that her smell brought on, as if she were someone else. He drank his coffee and left the house in depression. That night, during a frightful time of lying awake, he desired her again, with a brutal anxiety. But he did not want her that time, as she had been in the granary, but as she'd been that afternoon. Days later, the woman suddenly called him to her house, where she was alone with her mother, and she had him come into the bedroom with the pretext of showing him a deck of cards. Then she touched him with such freedom that he suffered a delusion after the initial shudder, and he felt more fear than pleasure. She asked him to come see her that night. He agreed in order to get away, knowing that it was incapable of going. But that night, in his birding bed, he understood that he had to go see her, even if he were not capable. He got dressed by feel, listening in the dark to his brother's calm breathing, the dry cough of his father in the next room, the asthma of the hens in the courtyard, the buzz of the mosquitoes, the beating of his heart, and the inordinate bustle of a world that he had not noticed until then. And he went out into the sleeping street. With all his heart, he wanted the door to be barred and not just closed as she had promised him, but it was open. He pushed it with the tips of his fingers, and the hinges yielded with a mournful and articulate moan that left a frozen echo inside of him. From the moment he entered, sideways, and trying not to make a noise, he caught the smell. He was still in the hallway where the woman's three brothers had their hammocks in positions that he could not see and that he could not determine in the darkness as he felt his way along the hall to push open the bedroom door and get his bearings there so as not to mistake the bed. He found it. He bumped against the ropes of the hammocks, which were lower than he had suspected, and a man who had been snoring until then turned in his sleep and said in a kind of delusion, "It was Wednesday." When he pushed open the bedroom door, he could not prevent it from scraping against the uneven floor. Suddenly, in the absolute darkness, he understood with a hopeless nostalgia that he was completely disoriented. Sleeping in the narrow room were the mother, another daughter with her husband and two children, and the woman, who may not have been there. He could have guided himself by the smell if the smell had not been all over the house, so devious and at the same time so definite, as it had always been on his skin. He did not move for a long time, wondering in fright how he had ever got into that abyss of abandonment, when a hand with all its fingers extended and feeling about in the darkness touched his face. He was not surprised, for without knowing, he had been expecting it. Then he gave himself over to that hand, and in a terrible state of exhaustion, he let himself be led to a shapeless place where his clothes were taken off and he was heaved about like a sack of potatoes and thrown from one side to the other in a bottomless darkness in which his arms were useless, where it no longer smelled of woman but of ammonia, and where he tried to remember her face and found before him the face of Ursula, confusedly aware that he was doing something that for a very long time he had wanted to do, but that he had imagined could really never be done. Not knowing what he was doing because he did not know where his feet were, or where his head was, or whose feet, or whose head, and feeling that he could no longer resist the glacial rumbling of his kidneys, and the air of his intestines, and fear and the bewildered anxiety to flee, and at the same time stay forever in that exasperated silence and that fearful solitude. Her name was Pilar Tenera, and she had been part of the exodus that ended with the founding of Mikado, dragged along by her family in order to separate her from the man who had raped her at 14 and had continued to love her until she was 22, but who never made up his mind to make the situation public because he was a man apart. He promised to follow her to the ends of the earth, but only later on, when he put his affairs in order and she had become tired of waiting for him, always identifying him with the tall and short, blonde and brunette men that her cards promised from land and sea within 3 days, 3 months, or 3 years. With her waiting, she had lost the strength of her thighs, the firmness of her breasts, her habit of tenderness, but she had kept the madness of her heart intact, maddened by that prodigious plaything. Jose Arcadio followed her path every night through the labyrinth of the room. On a certain occasion, he found the door barred and he knocked several times, knowing that if he had had the boldness to knock the first time, he would have had to knock until the last. And after an interminable wait, she opened the door for him. During the day, lying down to dream, he would secretly enjoy the memories of the night before. But when she came into the house, merry, indifferent, chatty, he did not have to make any effort to hide his tension, because that woman whose explosive laugh frightened off the doves had nothing to do with the invisible power that taught him how to breathe from within and control his heartbeats, and that had permitted him to understand why men are afraid of death. He was so wrapped up in himself that he did not even understand the joy of everyone when his father and his brother aroused the household with the news that they had succeeded in penetrating the metallic debris and had separated Ursula's gold. They had succeeded, as a matter of fact, after putting in complicated and persevering days at it. Ursula was happy, and she even gave thanks to God for the invention of alchemy, while the people of the village crushed into the laboratory, and they served them guava jelly on crackers to celebrate the wonder. And Jose Arcadio Buendia let them see the crucible with the recovered gold, as if he had just invented it. Showing it all around, he ended up in front of his older son, who during the past few days had barely put in an appearance in the laboratory. He put the dry and yellowish mass in front of his eyes and asked him, "What does it look like to you?" Jose Arcadio answered sincerely, "Dog shit." Thank you.